Dear teammates, just a quick walkthrough of our Trello board, which is a Kanban. And the reason why we're using Kanban is that it reflects how we are working with our continuous delivery and continuous integration workflow. So it reflects the steps that we take. So it's very easy to know where we are and what we're doing. It gives a good overview. Now, we have these lists. And the idea of the Kanban is we're working from left to right. So we have all our user stories and use cases, and add as many as you want, as you think are relevant. We can then, so brainstorming, in other words, we can decide then what it is we need to work on by moving them over to our backlog. Now, what I've also done is here then, once we've done the backlog, we then choose to work on something locally. We move it to the sprint in progress, and I will show you how in a moment. Once that's done, and we've done a pull request, and it's being tested on Heroku review apps, it's moved to here. And then whoever has tested it and says it's good can then move it into staging for systems and acceptance testing. Now, this reflects the Heroku staging environment, where we're testing all the various features and use cases that we've added along the way. And once we're happy with all this, we can then manually migrate to the production environment in Heroku. I've added a few additional cards. So UX design was just more a checklist to make sure that we thought about the color scheme, the font, the forms. We know the the layout and the look and feel of the site. We maybe want to add a logo and anything else that we think is important. There's then documentation. Now, this is just here as a checklist so that we don't forget. And then I just added this for the technology stack. So describing our development environment. So I can click on this. And we can see then that we're going to use Visual Studio Code, Git will be Python, Git extensions for VS Code, so we can communicate with GitHub to do the add, commit, push, sync, but also then be able to initiate a pull request. And we can also actually add issues to this as well. We'll be working with the GitHub repository, and we will then finally have it deployed to Heroku. And then looking at the technology stack for continuous delivery and continuous integration. So I just mentioned the platforms that we're working on. So VS Code, WinMac, with the cloud, with GitHub, Heroku, the technologies, HTML, CSS, and then whoever takes on the role of lead UX designer decides whether to use Bootstrap or materialize CSS or anything else that they think is suitable. Using Python 3.9, we're using Flask and a number of Flask extensions. So Flask user, Flask session, Flask Mongo engine. And then because of that, because we're using the object document mapper, called Mongo engine, we have Flask Mongo engine that provides us with a number of additional features, such as pagination, if we need it, that then uses Mongo engine, which is the object document mapper for the CRUD functions. And that in turn creates all the PyMongo code for us in the background. We don't need to know, it's a black box essentially. And then that talks to MongoDB. So that's our technology stack. As you can see, we can add images to our cards, and that way it's just kind of easy to see, yeah, that's the coding environment, that's the technology stack, and so on. You don't have to do that. What I've also done, and I have something here called features and functions. Now, why is that? Well, with user stories and use cases, in theory, if we think through our user stories and use cases to the nth degree, we should be able to figure out everything we need, such as messages to interact with our users, such as error handling, error pages. But I also know that it's not always easy to think of something to the nth degree. So I always have this as a separate kind of checklist. So I'm going to add something here, for example. I'm going to add the Flask user extension. I'm also going to add the Flask Mongo engine, because it's a key part of this. And what this means is, looking at these, then we know that, okay, as we're working on our user stories, use cases, you will be using some of these features and functions. And what I also know is, if we look at the user stories, so as a user, I want to register an account. As a user, I want to log in. As a user, I want to reset my password. As a user, I want to change my password. As a user, I want to change my login name. Now I know that Flask user will tick 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of these use cases or user stories. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to color code this now, because I could use label, which I will in a sec, but ideally what I'd like to do is I just like to color code this in, we use that color blue, that's nice. Okay, and then I'm going to color code this cover in the same blue color. Now why? Because these will be resolved by implementing and configuring the Flask user extension. And I'm not saying we need to do this, it's just a way to visually quickly identify what's related. And then we'll do that one. Now, one of the things, so we now know that Flask user is related to those use cases. So let's say, as we're going to start working on this, and I want to work on Flask user, I will click on that. I'm going to add a description here later on. I will say installing and configuring Flask user for user authentication and authorization. Say that. Now, what I want to do is I want to work on this. And remember that this Kanban follows the continuous delivery and continuous integration workflow that we're going to follow using Visual Studio Code, GitHub repository, and Heroku. So I go to Move, and I click on this list here, and I want to add it. Now, ideally, I should add it to the backlog first, so we can discuss, these are the ones that we need to work on. But I'm just going to be bold at the moment and move it to the sprint in progress, just to show you. So click on that, click Move. Okay, click outside of this. You can see now that this has moved to the sprint in progress. So this is where I'll start working on it locally, get it working, and then when I'm happy, ta-da, I will then push all the changes to the GitHub repository, my development branch. I will then initiate a pull request to merge my development branch with the master branch. However, I can't create, or I can't approve that merge. That has to be done by someone else in the team. So what I'll do is I will go into here. I will click Move. So I will actually add a comment here to say works locally, initiated pull request. And then what happens is when I initiate the pull request, we will get a Heroku review application. So what I'll do is I'll go to Heroku, I'll get the link, the URL to that dynamic instance. I will paste it here so that whoever does the testing can quickly go in and just have a look at it. But this is essentially it. So I'll save that, click Move, and move it then. I'm not going to do that right now. And move it to Sprint for test and approval. And then whoever takes on the task of testing that will then go in, add a comment, and then move it to the staging system acceptance testing. So what will happen then is once you approve the pull request, it will automatically merge my development branch to the master branch, which will automatically deploy the Heroku staging environment. And then we can do the proper system and acceptance testing, where we're testing all the features and functions that we've currently created. And once we're happy with the status of that, we can then manually migrate that to production. So this gives us a visual overview to see how we are progressing as we're coding. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move back this Flask user and move it back to where it belongs, which is features and functions. So this is just kind of a high-level overview of how this works. I'm going to add additional descriptions in what each one of these are. For example, the backlog, just to say that this is, because I think it's important, um, just to give us an idea so we understand what we're doing and why we're doing it. So again, just a quick overview. We add as many user stories, use cases as we want. If you want to color code them, you can. I do that so they link to the features and functions. And this is just where I add components that should be thought of or should be included as we are thinking about our user stories to the nth degree. However, as you know, it's not always it's not easy to think about things to the nth degree. So I add things here just as a kind of a checklist to make sure, okay, how we cover this. And again, because these, for example, Flask user, it will actually cover a number of these user stories as use cases. So I've color coded them just so it's easy to see that they're linked. And I will actually work on the Flask user. This is what I will be moving along here through the backlog, the sprint in progress, the sprint test of approval, the staging, the production, and so on. So I hope this is a clear enough overview of the Trello board. And I will continue with the next set of videos. So thank you, dear teammates, and talk to you later. Bye bye.